Anybody hear my music? I can turn it off. Oops.
No. Hello. Okay, welcome to Deeper Than Dogma. Tonight, our topic is going to be on the results of the recent Pew Research poll on the America's changing religious landscape. We're going to be talking about some of the stats that came up from that, and our best uneducated guesses of what this actually means in the grand scheme of things. Now, if anybody actually followed this thing, one of the main things that came out from the Pew Research poll is that there was a one of the questions that they asked regarding religious affiliation. They listed off several options, obviously Christian, Protestant, evangelical, Protestant, mainline Protestant, Catholic. They go through the entire list, and people kind of stop them when. Okay, you've said one that I am, whatever. But one of the ones they always ask is unaffiliated. Now these aren't people that recognize themselves as agnostic or atheist or anything. They're just unaffiliated, just apathetic. Maybe they don't care, and that's where you saw the largest growth there. That went from I believe it was 16% in 2007, up to 22% in 2014, increase of almost on this at 6.7% increase. So in 7 years, people that at one point in time might have recognized themselves as some form of religion or not, now just unaffiliated, don't recognize at all. But what does this mean? So why do we think that we're starting to see this new group of people that are recognizing themselves as non-religious? If anybody wants to jump in, go for it.
I think it might have something to do with the fact that I think human beings naturally tend to look beyond logic to solve problems. I think that's one thing that's unique about us. And everybody wants to put this thing in a box, and they know it's bigger than a box, bigger than a bread box, as they say. And yeah, they know there might be something to it, but they don't like the politics and the hypocrisy.
See, it's not even just people that some people just might make them represent themselves as just another form of Christian or other faith or spiritual or whatever. These are all options that are allowed as all, and people aren't just turning away from the organizations themselves, because that's one of the things that you do hear about. But people just really just turning away from religion in general.
It's healthy.
Yeah, I think it might be. I think it might be a combination of things. I think with all the scandals in the Catholic Church, for example, I think a lot of people have been turned off with that, and it's made the leaders of the Catholic Church look more human than divinely inspired. Then I think the atheist movement is another factor. I think it's becoming more acceptable to be an atheist and to speak your mind, and I think just the way like homosexuals are now being more accepted. I think atheism is going to be more accepted. So it's going to be, I think, less shameful in culture to not go to church on a Sunday, where probably before it was more of a social peer pressure to perhaps go to church. So I think just with the diversity of culture and so forth, people are starting to get more comfortable with that diversity and say, hey, I don't think I need to go to church that much, or give religion much thought.
I think I agree. Can I ask Floyd a quick question about that? It's just that I wonder why more people are, Floyd, why you think more people don't self-identify as atheist, because like Saka was pointing out before we went on air, it's not necessarily that the number of people that call themselves atheist or agnostic are growing exponentially, but people that don't self-label, they would call themselves non-religious or just unaffiliated, or the group labeled as the so-called nuns, right? That's the group that's growing. So why don't they label as atheist? Is there something? Is that label still too toxic to get near, or yeah.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, maybe they just don't want any label at all. They just, they just went out. Maybe they see atheism as a position in religion, and maybe they're just, but you still have a religious perspective, so to speak. So if you're a nun, you just have no religious perspective. I'm not going to give any opinion. I'm just not going to, just not going to toss, my chips into the game.
Can I say something? I was thinking that along kind of about what Benny was saying, that I think for a lot of people, there is still a stigma with the label of atheist, because it's not just a being. For people that identify as atheists, that just means not a belief. There's no belief in God, but for people that haven't understood or really read or haven't been involved in the movement, for a lot of them, I think that is kind of an antagonistic position for them. And so you still, sorry, let me finish what I was saying really quick. But so I mean, I know at least for people that I interact with, it's like you are careful when you say that to people. So I think that there still is a stigma about it, because they assume a lot of things about you if you say you're an atheist, whether it fits or not. So
there's a New York Times columnist, Ross Junthot. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but he actually makes a really good point, and that is, what you don't see is a decrease in religiosity per se. People still have that religiosity. They just don't like to tie themselves to organized religions. And what's really interesting is he's noticing that a group of people who actually is becoming popular isn't the religious nor even the atheist movement, more or less. It is mostly people who take alternate forms of spirituality. People like Jonathan Edwards, psychic readings, that kind of thing, tarot cards. Mostly anyone who involves themselves with the New Age movement. That's the New Age movement and newer religious movements are actually where things are going. I actually have quite a few colleagues here who are women who converted from their Christian backgrounds to Wiccanism. Wicca is a kind of a nature worship religion. Some of them might be atheists. Some of them might have a goddess concept that they actually do worship and believe in. But the fact of the matter remains that alternate religions and spiritualistic religions, and religions that are more about that kind of religious nature of worship, that's, I think, what's growing. I don't really think it's a debate about the existence of God, which is kind of where we're coming at it, because we're so used to that on this format, arguing whether or not God exists and how prevalent that is for our religious beliefs.
Well, actually, I do have some numbers relating to that as well, about what they recognize in the unaffiliated category compared to the spiritual category. But Hogtie is just going to do a drive-by hangouting here real quick, because he said he wanted to make a point, but can't stay too long, so feel free to go ahead.
And I acknowledge how ill-mannered that is to just pop in and just sort of slam you guys and then take off. But I'm barbecuing tonight, and I don't believe in a higher power that might serve to protect my barbecue if I'm not watching it carefully. So I'm here to share the prophecy. I occasionally like to remind people about some of the writings that were done as the atheist movement, if you want to call atheism a movement. Like, so back into the the 60s and through the 70s of the United States. Those writings, you can see that they would forecast that there would actually be an increase in religiosity in individuals. That once you bring an issue like this into the public discussion, so for example, often the comparison is made, and I think sort of overgenerously, to civil rights movement for blacks. I mean, it's just such a they're oceans apart, the circumstances, but there are certainly some parallels to be drawn. Before there was a big, strong social movement for black people, things were fine. I mean, as far as they had a system. It was, and then it was once you start looking at it is when you realize, like, oh, it's not fine. And then there's big discussion and there's upheaval and whatnot. Now, what it tends to do is once you get into that discussion, is it increases the polarization, and people who were moderates, who were just sort of okay with a system where black people weren't treated very well, sort of had to decide, like, well, no, you can't just sort of casually identify with that social system, with that institutionalized racism. You either got to come on board with, look, people are people, or you got to throw a sheet over your head and join the KKK. And that's what happens. Some percentage of them do that. I realize now I've accidentally compared evangelical Protestantism to the KKK, but in my example, that would be the parallel, is that you get people who are comfortable with their level of religiosity, wherever they may fit on the spectrum, and then once it starts to be part of the public discourse and a discussion, and you have little culture wars over stupid things, like whether there should be a nativity scene at City Hall, or whether a baker should have to bake a cake for a couple of lesbians, like, that's sort of where the traction is in these big social debates. It forces people to say, well, what role does religiosity play in my life? And what are the standards under which I'm going to evaluate whether I want to call myself when people say, what are you? Do I want to say I'm a Catholic? Is it just because I'm a member of that church, or do I actually have to now, when I say I'm a Catholic, I'm actually adopting, I'm wearing as a badge of honor that I believe that system of thought. And what ends up happening then is all the people who were sort of comfortable with their moderate level of religiosity now start saying, like, nah, I don't really believe. And they'll walk away from it. But the others will go to the more extreme. So here's the prophecy has always been that what you would see is, and you look at these graphs that the Pew has put out, all the lines related to religiosity are very gently sloping down to the right. It's a little bit lower, a little bit lower, a little bit lower, and then unaffiliated just like shoots up and crosses them, right? And the prediction is that evangelical Protestant, being the more extreme in their faith, would actually tend to increase, and it has been increasing. This last one shows over the last 7-year period, shows a change of negative almost 1%, which is really not very much when you're talking about numbers in the range of 1/4. So I would consider that a negligible change, but it is the first time that now evangelical Protestantism is actually coming down, which is to me that's the one surprise there.
Really? Surprise? I'd say it's inevitable.
Well, I do think, I mean, this is the way the movement goes. You got to sort of picture like the way that movements happen. It's the same way like when a stick breaks, right? There's increasing pressure, and then there's these sudden debacle style changes. And that's been the prediction with this, and the pattern is that you get sort of gradual movement of the moderates towards non-belief or disinterest in the whole thing. And then you get a compression effect amongst those people who wish to continue to be believers. They tend to compress into being more religious extremists, and you actually see increases in their numbers. And it seems that it's a paradoxical prediction, but it's reliable. This has happened with many different social changes. But then it's sort of like, pressed for time and seen smoke in my front yard, I come up with this terrible analogy. It is like popping a zit. And this is what we've been waiting for about 40 years before I ever got involved with any of this stuff. The prediction is, and of course the people who started this movement are long dead, right? But not all of them. But that's the moment they've been waiting for, is you get this increase in the radical Christianity, and people on YouTube screaming, people on your street corner shouting in bullhorns, and that only goes so far. And then there gets to be a point where there's too much compression, and there's the craziness, and eventually now the numbers will start to come down. I don't want to call it and say this negative 0.9% is actually the zit popping, the evangelical Protestant zit popping, but it's got to happen soon.
I tend to agree with that because I see it in my own life, people that are in the moderate spectrum, and then they're basically getting pressed from both sides to make a decision as to where you're going to fall. I mean a friend, even on the Google Plus community, there's people that identify as moderate or more universalist and that kind of thing, and they're told from the Christian perspective, they're told they're not Christian. I mean, they're told that you're not a real Christian, and so they're basically being forced to either adopt the more extreme stances on things, or they're gonna eventually maybe shift toward the other side. So I would probably agree with that.
That's a great point, and I think you'll see an increase of families being torn apart and workplaces having problems and whatnot. I noticed the room is filled, so as I go to tend to my barbecue, I think I'm going to actually empty my chair, if that's okay, rather than hold a chair while I'm cooking. So
absolutely.
I appreciate the let me just sort of pop in with the prophecy. So, right, good evening, folks. I will be listening.
Not a problem.
See you, Hogtie.
Could I comment on Mr. Hogtie's prophecy, or should I possibly let someone else speak, because there have been people who came in that haven't had a chance to?
Yeah, sure. I think that I'm gonna put up the main screen here of just the decline, or the what the stats are since compared to 2007 2014. So some of the main religions, and then as I put that up, I'll just put it on the main screen. I'll let people take a look at it, as well as address some of the points that have been brought up so far. So Ozzy, you jumped in there late as well. Did you want to add anything to this?
And hit present on there, Sokka. Hit present on you so that it stays on you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, there's a couple of things to say, and actually, I have some statistics that I wanted to throw up there if I can screen share at some point.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
That bear out what I'm about to say here. But I've sort of been interested in this question, and I don't have any sort of training in sociology or anything like this, but it's an interesting question. And there are a couple of sociologists named Hoot and Fisher who about a year ago did a careful statistical analysis that suggests that the recent increase in the nuns doesn't reflect an increase in secularism, exactly as what Maximus was saying, nor a reduction in religiosity, but rather it's a repudiation, a rejection of certain political attitudes that are associated with religious denominations. So they looked at just a huge array of different studies, and they did a meta-analysis, and they did factor analysis to sort of tease apart various variables. And what they found is that over the past 40 years, Americans have become increasingly likely to deny an affiliation with a religion. People with no religious preference rose, they say, from about 5% of the population in the early 70s, in about 1972, to about 20% or so today. That's 20% when they published that paper. But they say that Americans aren't reporting a corresponding decline in belief in things like God, or life after death, or souls, or any of those religious concepts. And so they say that Hoot and Fisher argued that when you look at the data, when you disaggregate the data, the increased tendency to answer, I'm quoting them here, the increased tendency to answer no religious affiliation coincided with the polarization of American politics, end quote. And so they attribute this trend in part as a political backlash from political moderates and modestly liberal people and strongly liberal persons. And that most of this rise in the nuns is a function of a new generational cohort, a new generation of people coming in who hold very different attitudes about sex and drugs and homosexuality and marriage and so forth than the previous generation. And so they have to sort of reevaluate the religious landscape, and they are finding that existing denominations and affiliations don't reflect their values. And so they're not less religious, they're not less likely to believe in God, but they are not comfortable identifying with these traditional denominational categories. And that would explain why you see an increase in nuns and not an especially significant increase in atheism or agnosticism. Oh, and I have some data to show on this as well at some point.
Oh, and if I could also add to your point, there are also people who are affiliated in the more religious camps who, by the polls, are never actually identified as atheists. People who actually accept a religion that is open to a form of atheism and repudiates kind of a classical theism. For example, many Buddhists, there are Buddhists who are atheistic, especially various Western incarnations of Buddhism, which tend to focus less on a God belief. So there are religious groups that would disavow it. Unitarian Universalists, for example, are another group where you could be an atheist and an affiliated member as well. So this also isn't necessarily a claim about metaphysics, which generally theism is. And even though we heavily tend to tie in theism with religion, because we tie in religion with Christianity, this is kind of where it gets bogged up. So there's also a bit of underrepresentation for who would be classified as an atheist, because so many people take a very deflationary or not are really very encompassing definition of atheist, which is merely lacking a belief in God. So yeah, so if you want to just represent it like that, the numbers do increase a little bit bigger.
Well, so what I put up here, like I said, this is the basic outline of the stats that they have here. I mean, there's a lot more that we can go through here as well. But like I said, that there you do see a decrease in especially sects of mainline Protestant and Catholic Christian. Here you see the rise in the unaffiliated. When we start talking about things like Buddhism or other faiths, see, I always thought that when people just classify themselves as spiritual or whatever, that they would be more inclined to put themselves in the other faiths category, but didn't think about whether or not they would be associated with the unaffiliated or not.
I wonder if I could throw up, screen share a couple of images of the statistical trend I was pointing to earlier, just to substantiate what I was saying.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, I've never actually done a screen share, so if this doesn't work, somebody please tell me.
Just green box on the left-hand side, and...
Okay, can you see what's on my screen right now?
No.
We can see you.
You can see me. What am I doing wrong?
You have to click the box that says screen share. It's a little green arrow, and then there's one other thing to click after that.
Yeah, I've done that. Oh, there
There
we go.
Window up?
There we go.
There we go.
There we go. Gotcha.
Thank you. Thanks for indulging me.
There we go.
Now we can see it.
I'm a bit of a techno peasant. Okay, can you see my mouse on the screen when I move it around?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, so this is just a simple graph that plots time horizontally along the horizontal axis, starting in 1972, terminating in 2012. The vertical axis is the number of the number of religious preferences by percentage. So 5%, 10%, 15, 20% going up. Now, if you start in 1972 in the bottom left, you'll notice it's pretty flat from 1972, and it increases very, very, very gradually until 1988. And then around 1990, things start to take a very steep increase, going up to 2012. So this looks like, hey, everybody seems to be sort of trending one way. But let's hope this works here. Switching to this image. Can you see the next image on my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay. This is the same data, but disaggregated according to political affiliation. If you look at the bottom red line, okay, that represents conservatives over the same period of time. Conservatives in 1972 are pretty much where they've always been, 2012, right? That many years later, they've barely moved, okay, over 40 years later. But look at people who are slightly conservative. That's the pink line. Notice the slope increases more dramatically there. Again, starting in around 1990, things start to go up again. Then they flatline a little bit. Then you look at people who are moderates. That's the pale blue line. It increases more sharply, again, starting around 1990. And then slightly liberal people, steeper still. They all start off, the people who are moderates start off much higher than the other groups to begin with. That is, they're more likely, there's a greater percentage of them that are going to identify as no religious affiliation. But that number is stable until about 1990 again, and then a sharp increase. And then, of course, if you look at people who self-identify as liberal, not just slightly liberal, that trend is, again, pronounced the same way. So when you disaggregate the data, looking at political affiliation, you find that the increase in the nones is overwhelmingly people who are moderate, slightly liberal, and liberal, whereas people who are slightly conservative or conservative, they really haven't changed. So those conservative people really are not abandoning those denominational affiliations. It's the people who are moderate, slightly liberal, and liberal who are doing it. And this is why Hout and Fisher argue that this has more to do with politics and a political backlash and a turn towards political conservatism and polarization in the American political scene that started in the late 80s and in the 90s and to the present, that has driven a new generational cohort to divest itself of denominational affiliation.
Benny, you wanted to address this before as well?
Yeah. I would wonder if we'd be tempted to look at that and say, well, it's the same liberal people, or basically the same liberal people, that lost their religion over time. But I wonder if there isn't more to it than that. I think that some of the people who would have once considered themselves conservative lose their religion, lose their faith, and then become more liberal also in turn. That's exactly what happened to me. I mean, I grew up in a conservative home. I would have considered myself conservative growing up, and now I don't. And so those changes happened at the same time. I think a lot of what kept me thinking in a conservative way went away once I lost my faith, because I have different people, different pressures, and so I just think that's worth considering. So,
yeah, but I think the groups that are diminishing most quickly are the mainstream Protestant groups, and these are kind of more likely to house people who are also politically liberal as well as theologically liberal. Growing up, did you perhaps have more of a Christian fundamentalist background, or was it just mainline like anyone else?
It was more fundamentalist, yes, for sure.
That might have been the reason why the data doesn't reflect you as well as it might reflect these other groups. Just one scenario off the top of my head.
Idle, you wanted to throw in something there as well?
I think Ozzy's onto something when he mentions politics. I thought it was a really interesting thing. Before World War I, Americans were like, you're either a Californian or you're Maryland, or after World War I we turned to Americans. After World War II, we had this strange, weird, semi-fascist movement in America, where, as you I'm sure well aware, the logo on the fake money we have is "In God We Trust," and we suddenly became the official country of God, and it became part of the national pride theme that was being implied, and I use that word specifically, implied, especially with television, that suddenly we were, as Americans, we were the top notch, we were God's chosen, we are the ones representing, and I think it's dangerous when you can just slap an American flag on something and everybody just, oh, praise Jesus. There's something disturbing about that. And when you mention the political spectrum in this, I think that's a huge, at least in Western thought, because I know that Britain's done the same thing. I know the Britons said that God's on their side. And I just thought it was very brilliant what you pointed out. Politics is a huge, at least in my country, a huge influence upon the religious folk who in real life would give you the shirt off their back, help you change a tire, they'd be, but they have this pride, this vanity, this inflated ego or egocentric notion of America, and that we are the official country of God. And when a critical thinker gets a hold of that, it falls to shit.
One of the things that Idle brought up there is that there was this concept of the whole Red Scare during the Cold War. That on one side of the fence you had the godless communist heathens, and that you saw a lot of turn towards more of a religious attitude in the U.S. at that time. Does this necessarily represent changing times, or just a leveling out with other Western nations, after recovering from this, that sudden surge of religiosity in the U.S.?
I think it was propaganda, and I think after a generation or two, people aren't that stupid. Honestly, I don't think people are as at first, and just after a war, you got a ton of your male population wiped from the planet. Those who have come back. Our innocence possibly damaged, and at a very vulnerable point, you begin enforcing this notion upon the people. And I think after a generation or two, people just wake up. We weren't really a Jesus country. I mean, yeah, we had lots of Christians. I mean, we're primarily Christian folk when it comes to population, anyway. But we didn't slap our chest and walk around and strut, until this notion was implied that if you're an American, you're Jesus. It's all Jesus, and it was so easily accepted because you didn't want to be a godless communist. Of course, you wanted to support your men when they came home. I don't know. I think people just aren't that stupid. I think it works for a very limited amount of time, just like 9/11. That scare, the fear, worked for a very limited amount of time, and then people began to question the actions of, they could feel their environment a little more. I think that people honestly woke up from it. And where are you going to go when the voice that is so loud and so influential screams at you about Jesus, America, Christ? You know, it's going to break down. It's inevitable. It has to break down. People wake up. They're smart. That's what I was wanting to get in there.
Does anybody else want to like on the topic that is this a natural? Is this a decline that we expect to see consistent, or just a natural leveling out? Does anybody else want to add on to that?
I would actually like to comment on that one. One very popular thesis in the 20th century while studying religious studies was actually called the secular thesis, which was the notion that as modernity increases, so does secularity. And since the 21st century, that view has been drastically challenged, especially considering a lot of what was said by Idol Smasher, especially in the Western world, in the United States particularly. What we had is kind of a change of religion, wherein certain religious sects augmented themselves, people kept religious and supernatural beliefs, and religious studies scholars were really of the opinion of asking themselves, what happened here? Why were these other scholars wrong? And of course, what happened is a variety of things. You had the Cold War, which ignited a whole plethora of religiosity back in the United States and in a lot of places in the Western world as a reaction to the Soviet Union's communism, for example. Furthermore, religion actually did maintain because it provided a lot of societal resources. Not only that, but it managed to keep a foothold. And so all these religious studies scholars tried to figure out where they went wrong, and the analysis was kind of interesting. A lot of people thought that it's our very notions of secularity itself. What does it mean to be secular, and what does it even mean to be involved in a religion? And one of the answers that I actually found the most convincing was an answer not even by someone tackling the problem of secularism, but someone focusing on what religion even is. And that's the scholar, you could search her up, her name is Meredith McGuire. She came up with this interesting religious paradigm called the lived religions paradigm, where religions are actually social constructs that are created intersubjectively by people. What a religion is by definition what you think of it. And this definition has been poured out. If you look at the origins of religion, and someone who does this quite well is Tomiko Mosazawa. Religious studies actually started off by taking theological epistemic categories, how to define doctrines and salvation and eschatology and things like that, and trying to apply them to other things that they thought, you squint your eyes a little, it looks like Christianity. So that's how it read originally what a religion was, what resembles Christianity. And that idea has gone out into the zeitgeist, where we do have this notion of religion present within other cultures because of Western influences. And of course, religion now is very intersubjective. It's what a definition of Christianity or Buddhism is held between the minds of its adherents and believers, and that's something that can socially change and augment itself, which makes it far more dynamic than our pure simplistic notions of categories of religion, wherein if you're Buddhist, you have to follow this stuff. If you're Christian, you have to follow this stuff. It's actually very dynamic and free-flowing, and has a lot of wiggle room to augment itself when society itself changes. So that's really why I don't think religion goes away. Religion doesn't go away. Religion just evolves. To borrow something from another academic discipline, biology. Religion evolves.
That's actually a great point. We'll actually circle back around that in a second. I think Ozzy just wanted to add something to that as well, though.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. What I was going to say is a lot of people think that, okay, as Maximus was saying, there was this hope among a lot of secularists actually that as modernity advanced, that secularism would increase, religiosity would just sort of die on the vine. We'd all just become atheists in the future, and of course that has not come to pass. But that doesn't mean that secularism actually isn't actually having an effect, just because people aren't sort of all becoming atheists and abandoning religiosity entirely. In the example that I was giving and the data that I was showing from that study, it was showing that it was a change in political attitudes that the next generation, this coming generation that's coming in now, that is the new values that they hold that explains this increase in the nuns. And it's because they have different values when it comes to the concept of sin, extramarital sex, homosexuality, marriage, a host of things, right? And so they're not necessarily less religious. They didn't not necessarily sort of abandoning God and a belief in life after death and souls and things like that. But traditional religious values are absolutely dying off in a big way, and that's why people are loath to affiliate and associate themselves with a certain religious identity. Now, but that sort of beggars the question: why on earth is there this change in values, if not the fact that religiosity or religions are losing their grip on people's minds when it comes to certain kinds of values? There are forces and factors in our culture now that I think are stronger.
I think we just lost Ozzy there for a second. A little bit of lag. But, oh, is he back?
Yes. Are you back?
Oh, did I break up there?
Just at the end there.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. So I mean, there was a time when things like church and stuff like that, pretty much everyone in a community would go to church, and in school, religious values were taught the same way as they were in church, and consequently, the religion within your community really dictated your values. But now, I mean, we think of things like the internet and television and movies and things like that. These are forces that are not religious that shape our values. I mean, a show like Will and Grace, I think, did more to change people's attitudes about male homosexuality and reform people's ideas about love between men than almost anything else that's gone on in our culture. And I mean, that was just a TV show, right? So I think that is in a way a triumph of secularism. It just hasn't turned into a complete repudiation of certain religious ideas, but religious values, those, it seems to me, are just evaporating, and I think that has a lot of very conservative religious people in a kind of moral panic.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I also want to
one second there, Mike.
Oh, go right ahead.
I'm going to put this back up here again. This is now this part of the Pew Research poll shows the the title here: General Replacement Helping Drive Growth of Unaffiliated, Decline of Mainline Protestantism and Catholicism. And you see in this where the largest percentage of the people that recognize themselves as unaffiliated is. This is the people roughly 35 and under. The millennials, as they're labeled here. That you brought up an interesting point there when you were talking about that religion might need to evolve. Is that something that that is possible in today's age? That can we change the mindset? Homosexuality is a huge reason why people are leaving the churches, because they don't agree with those views.
Or going to churches which are pro-LGBT, one or the other. So here's something that is very interesting about all that. Religion doesn't need to evolve. Religion does evolve. Like that, its ideas, as well as anything else, also take shape and kind of merge into other things, especially if they have and provide very socially necessary institutions that we rely upon within our society. That's just the way it is. So it's just how the very nature of social structures are themselves. And just to add a further point, another thing that's very interesting that I don't think has been touched upon yet is what I'm going to term here cultural fideism. Fideism is, of course, in Christianity, the belief that your faith isn't backed up by reasons or evidence, but is just believed because you believe. There is no reason to. It's all rational. It's separate from any form or process of reasoning. And this was actually very popular at a certain time, especially in the United States. I think in the United States it grew through a huge religious movement in the 19th century in upstate New York, and of course as a reaction to the Enlightenment with thinkers like Hume and Kant, who kind of destroyed the very popular ideas of theism, or the very popular arguments used to espouse theism. Fideism became very popular in certain circles, and of course, it's not just in Christianity. It also the ethos kind of leaks over and merges into other groups as well. So you have people who think that reason should apply to every sphere, but when it comes to religion and spiritual stuff, that's just all about feeling or emotion or something of the like. And of course, this is the one area where we don't need to apply any such reasoning skills, because this is the stuff we believe just to believe. So I think that there is a touch of that within our culture, even if it doesn't apply to Christianity. I think there's the same attitude that goes on for people who might believe in things like psychics or anything that deals with the supernatural.
B, you wanted to add in as well?
Yeah, I was just, it kind of goes along with what Epi and Ani were saying about kind of the evolution of religion and how and why it's happening, and I think that those are really good points. And I think that, like what Epi was saying, is that if religion, I mean, just take Christianity for example, if it had not evolved over the last couple of centuries, then it wouldn't still be here. I mean, you go back a couple hundred years and they're burning witches, or they're not accepting black people into the church, or interracial marriage. All these different things that have changed over the years that used to be a position within the church, that had to change, because otherwise they I don't think would have made it. So it's kind of like this evolution kind of has to happen, because there's this shift societally that kind of shifts more and more people towards a different way of thinking. And so then it's almost like the church or religion or whatever you want to call it, they see the shift, and then it's part of it is realizing, okay, we have to shift, otherwise we're going to get left behind. And so unless the church evolves and changes with the society, I don't think that it would stick around that long. And I think that, like what we were looking at the numbers with, that the majority of the unaffiliated seem to be in those, born in the 80s and later. Like I'm thinking, like I have 4 kids, and my kids have like none of the ideas that I did about homosexuality. Like they don't even hear that kind of stuff. So to them, it's going to be a foreign world to be that we lived in a place where that was just not acceptable when we were kids. And so it would be very hard to push a religion on them that holds that as an important concept within the religion. So I think that it has to evolve in order to accommodate the different things that the generations are learning and that kind of stuff.
Well, it is interesting that the majority of the people that you find that recognize themselves as unaffiliated are the millennials. The poll actually shows that the change is happening across the board. That even on this chart right here, you see that even people born from 1928 to 1945, you're starting to see a change in how they recognize themselves. Yeah, the larger group obviously is the millennials there, but it is happening, across the whole board. So I figured to show that one as well. Idle, sorry, you wanted to add something in as well?
Yeah, I've looked through history, and I'm trying to think of a time in Western culture. I say specifically Western because I was raised in a Western culture, but whether in Europe or America, where people were driving around and I don't want to use this term in the wrong way, but anybody who understands will understand. Queer bashing. This is where people get in the backs of pickup trucks and just get baseball bats and go to that end of town, or wait for people to come out of that end that club. And I'm trying to think of, and I've looked for, at least since Rome, I really can't find when it was an issue. And then suddenly, all of a sudden, in like the 50s and 60s, it became an issue. And I just wonder how much in our history as a culture that has ever been an issue at all. Your sexual preference, has it really ever been that shamed until we decided suddenly in recent years that we're going to hunt them down and make a big deal out of it, and say really nasty things about people we don't know and strangers, and I wonder if that's as well has been implied, much like the United States is the official country of Jesus. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I understand. It's interesting. There was a oh shoot, I wish I had the article now. There was a time about early 20th century when people were almost ready to declare the end of religion to a certain extent. That they thought that they'd moved down to a point of enlightenment where it wasn't an issue anymore. But we obviously saw this huge growth in religion again since the beginning of the 20th century. And I think one of the concepts that Hogtie Champ brought up earlier is that the most fundamental religious out there are when pressured with this concept, this idea, this growth of secularism, is they almost retreat back into this almost extreme fundamentalism position. A good example of this would be that there have been several cases that have gone up to the high courts regarding intelligent design being taught in schools, or the creationism being taught in schools. And now this is the discussion that's been going on for the better part of a century.
Yeah.
But yet the majority of the trials that have actually gone up to the high courts have been within the last 12 years. The vast majority of them. It's that they're it's almost like they want to push it out more now, and it might be due to a fear of a growing amount of secularism.
When I first heard of intelligent design, I thought that it meant really, and I was naive at the time, that by looking at the evidence, if you saw, wow, this is the work of a computer generated something or other, or this looks intelligently designed, that's what it meant. And I had to really look for it and find out that it means be Christian, or a certain view of Christianity is the only thing that matters. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, it shouldn't matter. It shouldn't be this controversial, in my opinion.
So
I have a question to raise. I think maybe to Epi or anyone who cares to answer. I think it was Epi, or could have been Hogtie, who mentioned that I might just lump them under the umbrella term woo, or we sometimes call them that. The New Age spirituality stuff. Is that better? That people are identifying with when people say that they're spiritual but not, or excuse me, they say they're spiritual but not religious. Those people usually mean that they believe in some kind of a force that controls the universe, and they identify with, I don't know, the spirit of the cosmos or whatever. And but they also sometimes make bizarre claims that can't be supported by any sort of empirical data. So, is that just a case of the devil would we be better off with the devil we know rather than the devil we don't know? In other words, just sticking with Christianity, which is something we know how to address, rather than all of these fragmentary versions of spirituality that are just unique to the individual. We really don't. We can't have arguments against individual spirituality if they're just all a bunch of different things. All you can say is that what you're believing is not well supported by the data. There's a lot of questions to ask about. Is that even a battle worth fighting? There's a lot of questions we could ask.
Well, I'm gonna let Max answer this because he brought it up. But in my personal opinion, real quick, until people start passing laws or having a prejudice towards certain people because their chakra aren't aligned right, then I might have a problem. But until then, I'm okay with it.
So one of the interesting things is, well, there are a lot of cases where people. Someone's echoing. Testing. Still hear my voice?
Yeah.
I think that's you, Idle. You might have to mute.
Sorry, I was laughing. I'll shut up.
Okay. All right, no echo, so I'll continue. So, well, there are a lot of cases where there are people who believe in this woo stuff, and sometimes it can even be dangerous without it trying to pass a legal law. For example, you have people like Jonathan Edwards, who takes women, say, or pretty much anyone, says, look, I can contact your dead loved one from the grave, and for a lot of money I could give you some kind of comfort. Or psychics who take up time and police and effort into using their quote-unquote powers to solve crimes. I do think those people are causing a bit of a problem, and they indeed should be addressed, because even when you don't pass laws, there is still something to say about it. But I digress from that point. The point I wanted to focus on was you could actually still be spiritual, not religious, and not wooey. In fact, there have been naturalists, people who believe in natural things and natural explanations, who try to push for a kind of naturalized religion. So, for example, Sam Harris is one person, and a lot of other people have been trying to do this too, where they try to take the meditation techniques and methods of Buddhism, find their natural neurological causes, but still apply and appropriate their techniques and strategies into daily life. So you have things like meditation that are indeed adaptable, and they do indeed show positive mental health benefits. So there are some modes of spirituality that are naturalistic, and yet at the same time can claim to be religious and spiritual in some kind of sense. So I don't want to clearly label everybody in that camp as being a woo merchant. So that's all I'll say about that.
Yeah, I agree with that sentiment. There are people that start profiting off things like that. It's I don't find the snake oil salesman thing a very respectable trade, I guess you could say. But I wish that we had a couple more theos on point. Unfortunately, Aaron had to leave, and some of the other people that we usually have weren't available tonight. But this isn't a win for atheism. This isn't a win for anything like that. This is like you said, the unaffiliated has gone up. It's an interesting change in some of the viewpoints that Americans have right now towards religion.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out about the win for atheism thing. It's a good clarity point to make.
Yeah, but even with the decrease you see in some, all the different sects of Christianity, how does this feel? Do you Max? Does this feel like is this a loss for Christianity?
In some ways, it could be a benefit, because if you take out the people who were never serious about it in the first place, and also you take away the people who weren't really escorted with this kind of knowledge, or never even bothered with it, and they have some kind of new challenge from either modernity or atheist or whatever, and what's left is the people who are serious about their faith, then it could actually mark out a new beginning. So you can never tell with these things. So I choose to remain a little optimistic about this, and I think at the end of the day there's always a bit of room for hope.
Okay. Now, I know that B and Benny, that you guys are former Christians. I can't and Xbox. How does this to relate to you guys? What were the main reasons that you guys had for leaving your faith, and do you think that can also be part of the larger picture why you see other people moving towards the unaffiliated position?
But I guess I'll go first. I think that my leaving Christianity is definitely a product of the culture as it is right now, because I think a huge part of it was the internet and access to information. I mean, growing up, I was born in '81, so growing up we didn't have. If you wanted to read philosophical arguments or any of that kind of stuff, you have to go to the library, and especially being a kid, I wasn't going to do stuff like that. So, but then when you have the ability to find stuff within 2 seconds on Google, it's a lot easier to see all the different sides of it, and you can't be isolated as much. And the environment that I grew up in was thankfully not as strict as a lot of people experience in terms of indoctrination kind of things, but there was a lot of the social circle was all within the church, so I didn't have a lot of information or differing opinions coming from different sources. But as soon as the internet started being available, there was this whole other realm of people and ideas and stuff that I could access, and unless there was going to be no access to the internet, you can't filter all that stuff out from encountering it. So I think that I think that was a huge part of my transition, and just my curious nature and my natural inclination to want to figure out stuff, I think, obviously. But I also think that just the whole, I don't know if it's a product of the secular movement trying to be more visible and whatever, but I don't remember knowing anybody who was an atheist growing up, as silly as that sounds. But to the area that I lived in, I didn't really have contact with anybody who would identify as an atheist. And then just in the last 5 or 6 years, I have family members and friends, and it's like when you start to have people that you know personally and that you love and you respect and you know that they're good people, that it's no longer this demonized thing. Just like I think with the homosexuality thing for a lot of Christians, it's easy to say, you know, they're these evil people, they're all this different, this and that, but then when you have a family member or a friend or somebody that you can't just cut out of your life very easily that is that thing that you've been demonizing, then you have to actually deal with the cognitive dissonance that makes, you know, when you have this person that you can't put in this category very easily. So I think for me that made a big difference, just interacting with people who were openly atheist and identified as such, and I saw they were good people, I knew who they were, and I didn't have to so it just made me shift a little bit, and then it just took a little bit of information and a little bit of search, and then I found myself where I'm at now. So
Benny, what about yourself?
Can you restate the question real quick?
Well, I know that, sorry, I was saying that you and B are former believers, former Christians. What turned you guys away from Christianity to the position you have now, and do you think that this is something that can also be shown to relate to why other people, the millennial generation, are moving away?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is, I mean, I can't help but, my perspective matters a lot to this, right? Because I was raised fundamentalist, evangelical Christian, and in the Pacific Northwest, as a, you know, whatever, white American. I mean, I have a certain perspective that shapes the way I see things. And Ozzy lives in Canada, and actually, from what I've heard from recent poll data, the numbers in Canada haven't changed that much, but the numbers in America have changed quite a bit. And yeah, I mean, the internet, really, once I had internet access and I could Google anything I wanted to, I mean, even before Google, I was looking things up on Yahoo or whatever, any way I could find. And once you can fact check things that your pastor is saying to you, any person who is relatively curious and has any innate skepticism, people who don't need to be taught skepticism, but people who are just like, well, why? I mean, like, why do you believe that? A lot of people don't need to be taught that. They just want to know, like, what is your, I mean, they wouldn't use the word justification, but they want to know, like, what is your justification, pastor? Why do you believe these things? And so when I was very young, I was already wondering questions about Noah's Ark and the distribution of animals across the earth. I mean, I remember at 8 or 9 years old, I was already like, you know, how do you explain, you know, the way that animals are distributed? How do you explain this? How do you explain that? And they can't. Or the Tower of Babel, or you know, there are all kinds of stories that don't make any sense. And once you go online and realize that these things have been researched, what happens when you're isolated from everything, when you're very young, is that you can't really explore these ideas fully. You can only say, you ask the questions to your parents and the people around you, and like B was saying, you can go to the library, but when you're very young, you wouldn't even really know how to look it up. I mean, you're using, what, the Dewey Decimal System to try to research philosophy at 12 years old? I mean, it would have been hard. It might have been possible for me to find Bertrand Russell when I was 13 or 14, but probably wouldn't have happened. So, and, you know, you learn biology and everything like that. So, I mean, I went to college and studied biology and psychology and learned about the development of the brain and the development of our bodies. So, as I learned more, those religious explanations that were anchored in faith and authority and tradition meant less and less to me. And I just, I want to have my feet firmly planted on something that I can tell people what my justification is. Where with religion I couldn't do that. I had to rely on faith and authority and tradition And as I got older, I couldn't do that anymore. So that's a long-winded, I think, answer to your question.
No, that was great. And do you mind if I jump in there too, Sokka? And mine's quick.
Yeah, sure.
I put mine out there quite a few times, so people probably do know that it was authority-based, indoctrination, light indoctrination. Just authorities around me, all my friends around me, teachers. That's where I got my information from and just accepted it. And I got to... And sure, there were questions throughout the Bible, just like Benny was saying, that I grew up just never got any really satisfactory answers. Later in age, I was like, I'm going to question some of these core beliefs and if I can justify them. And found that I couldn't. And this is after I've learned terms way later in life like logic, skepticism, critical thinking. Those weren't words in my vocabulary until I was late 20s. And once I looked at it and applied some of this stuff to it, and none of it actually follows unless, like Benny said, you have faith. And I can't make that leap.
Okay. Idle, what about yourself? You don't mind me asking.
It was nothing I never really found, and I still don't find, even with all the intensive research I've done, I don't find the contradiction of science and Bible. What got me, because I was raised Episcopalian, for those who don't know, Episcopalian is Catholic light. It's all the pageantry and none of the guilt. But we bowed before a dead man on a stick. The crucifix. We bowed to that thing. That's what we did. We had a Mary table that you bow to and all that good stuff. And then I go into the reception hall in the pastor's office, and there is on the wall the 10 Commandments. And one of the commandments is don't bow before an engraven image, sculptured image. It's bad for you. Don't make one. Don't bow to it. And here it is, a regular thing every service. Wednesday church service, Saturday night, or Sunday, the 2 services we had there, or the prayer service at night on Sunday, everybody walked into a church was genuflecting, kneeling, bowing before dead man on a stick. And that's when I noticed there's something not quite right about that. And eating the flesh and blood of a human sacrifice to gain eternal life. That turned me off. It was the dogma itself that did it. I didn't need an outside influence. It was everything that was Christianity turned me from it.
Interesting. Actually, and on that line as well, because you still recognize yourself as a God believer, correct?
I am a Noahide, yeah. I stick with the more Hebrew.
Mm-hmm. And, Max, you did a recent kind of switch over as well.
Oh yeah, I'm an Anglican, although I'm part of a more conservative tradition than a few other Anglicans. In fact, in the United States, it's a very liberal tradition that's called Episcopalianism. But yeah, it's called Anglicanism everywhere else in the world, which is an affiliation of the Church of England, sure. and yeah, that's where I stand.
Do you think any of the reasons why you left Catholicism? Because there was on the scale here too.
I just disagreed with the doctrine of cessationism. Plus, yeah, that's about it.
So how close were you moving towards an unaffiliated stage?
Not likely.
Just asking.
You guys would be lucky to have me, but no. Yeah, I actually have. Yeah, I don't. I actually still agree with a lot of the Catholic Church. I still think purgatory is a thing, for example. Not only that, but I think purgatory is a thing. I think that the Holy Mother of God, the Ever Virgin Mary, was forever a virgin. I still hold to I don't accept sola scriptura. I think that the councils and a lot of church tradition is necessary for the interpretation of Scripture. So yeah, there are a lot of things I still agree with Catholics on. There hasn't been much in terms of my own position on my religion. I still think that there is the real presence of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ within the Eucharist. Although maybe to characterize it a little more charitably than thinking of eating the flesh of a dead man, it's actually there's actually a distinction between the presence of God and the Eucharist itself, or the bread itself. The bread represents the accidents of actual bread. When you eat the bread, that's what you're eating and digesting, bread. However, the essence of our Lord and Savior's body is still within it, and of course that's something that is taken within our soul spiritually. It's not something that's digested and put through our particular organs. So just wanted to clear that up.
Hey, Max, I don't want to push back too hard, but I'm wondering. You seem like you've gone through some soul searching. Maybe that's a metaphor, maybe not. But you've questioned the things you believe. You're not just some mindless drone believing what you were taught. And I wonder. I mean, this could be a really long answer, so you don't need to make it one. But what keeps you from going down the kind of a path that I went down, where I just reach a conclusion that it's all bullshit and jettison the whole thing? I mean, you have interacted with enough people where you've come in contact with all of the same kinds of information that it took me to just say, there's not good reason for me to believe this anymore, and stopping believing. But you haven't reached the same conclusion. I think it's interesting that there are people who have access to the same information and don't reach the same conclusions. So, like I said, that could be a tough question to answer. It could be a really long answer, but hopefully you get the question.
Oh, okay. So the one thing that keeps me from becoming an atheist is I think that the arguments for God's existence still hold up. I think that the historicity of Christ is obviously the case. And furthermore, I don't think that there's enough skepticism with regards to the Bible that is enough to satisfy me to deconvert. So that's kind of the reasons why I stick to Christianity. I think that those are all kind of underlying reasons, but I think that my religious experiences themselves are kind of the main focal point. And furthermore, I think that Thomism itself, as a general doctrine and systematic doctrine of belief, is very strong, holds up well, and explains a lot of reality that I don't think a more secular, naturalistic mode of philosophy does do a good job on. So those would be a variety of reasons why I still am a Christian.
So one of the things that we showed in the stats there was that it wasn't just millennials that were leaving; that it was kind of across the board through all age groups there. And Floyd, I don't mean to insult you, but I don't think that you're a millennial, correct?
No.
But you're someone else that became unaffiliated and eventually atheist. I mean, you went through a variety of faiths as well, I believe. The reasons that you had, do you think that these are also some of the reasons to why we see this decrease in people that recognize themselves as religious?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think Benny and I share kind of the same story. I was always skeptical. As a child, I was skeptical, and I questioned, why, if this is the truth, why is it only being taught on Sunday and not taught in school Monday through Friday? And then I came across other people like Jewish people and so forth, and they didn't believe the same thing. And at a very early age, I just said, well, this all seems to be cultural to me. And this is not truth, where science seems to be true in every culture. So I just started to just get a general negative bias against religion in general. Although I try to find some deeper spiritual meaning in it, and I guess could try to use it as like a foundation for morality and so forth. But eventually I said, well, this is, it's just not needed. I think Occam's razor can just eliminate religion in general. It's just not needed. But at the time, I didn't have the internet either, and when people came up to me with like claims about biblical prophecy and stuff like that, I actually went to college libraries and I actually read books. So now millennials can just Google it and find a web page and perhaps just read 2 or 3 chapters and pretty much get a summary of what I had to read 2 or 3 large books over 25 years ago to obtain. So yeah, I definitely think the internet is accelerating people's decisions of which way they want to go.
B, you wanted to add something in there as well?
Yeah, I just was thinking about kind of what Epi was talking about, or the question that Benny asked about why, how interesting it is when you have people that are exposed to basically the same information, and you would think, well, that they would make the same conclusion, but it's not necessarily the case, and obviously experiences are not the same, so there's that factor. But it seems like in my life that I have quite a few people that, that to me it seems like people's natural tendencies have a large part to play in where they're going to fall on when they're presented with different information. There's people that I know, like my mom, for example. She's very experientially, emotionally, intuitively based, and she is not motivated or worried about the logical, analytical reasoning behind her different religious beliefs. I mean, we've talked about it before, and basically her position is that, you know what, I have my experience is my experience, and you know, whatever you believe is fine, but I'm going to believe that, and she's comfortable with that. And that's not something that I was ever comfortable with, to not have, like Benny was saying, like not being able to answer for a belief and have something that backed it up, or maybe it was somebody else that said, but I never felt comfortable with that personally. And so I think maybe it's kind of more of a, I don't know what you would call that, in a nature thing, where if you have a tendency to want to analyze, or, you know, not that people that believe aren't analytical or logical or whatever, but just it seems like maybe somebody's tendency to accept experience as, I don't know. That was just kind of my point I was trying to make. It may be just a natural tendency of what people are going to accept or what people are interested in exploring. You know what I mean? So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming in for this stuff tonight. We're going to be moving on to an after hang here shortly. We'll put out the link public for anybody that wants to join. I'll be on Xbox channel like usual. Before we go off though, if anybody has any closing statements that they want to kind of say, feel free to do it. We'll start with Xbox.
Yeah, I like to listen to these stats. There wasn't too much I could add to it. The one point I liked the most was when you clarified that this isn't a win for atheism. I hate when I hear people on both sides want to use it and say, well, you think this is a win for atheism, and then it starts a big fight, and then an atheist will bash other people over the head with, well, look at our numbers getting bigger. So I think that was a really good point to throw out there, that this shouldn't be a weapon or anything. We need to look at the sociological parts of it, and it is a very interesting topic, and I like looking at why things are moving that way, and I hope they keep trending that way. So thanks to the show. It was great.
No problem. Epi? Max? Fuck.
Okay.
There's the one time. There was the one-time show again.
So the changing of America's political and religious landscape is fairly interesting indeed. I really want to see how the future pans out, especially in light of the predictions we all probably want and expect for. And of course, this is kind of one of the reasons why I really enjoy kind of participating in this religious discussion, in this great debate community. It's actually kind of a really interesting microcosm of the whole system itself. So it's really interesting seeing where all the arguments on both the very extreme and thinking sides on this one are coming out from. So my attitude is overall a sense of excitement.
All right, cool. Floyd?
Yeah, I guess it'll be interesting to see how the 2016 political election turns out. You know, will we have another Democrat in office, and will there be any shift in Congress? So perhaps that will kind of give some more insight of where America's going. So it's not too far away.
All right, Benny?
Yeah, I agree with Floyd. That's a really big indicator. So that will be interesting to see where we go. If we have a Republican Congress and presidency at the same time, well, you know, it changes where we end up going. But I actually, not to disagree with Epi and Ozzy, because I think they both made good points, but I do see this as an encouraging change. I don't really care if people self-identify as atheist or agnostic. I think the fact that they're not identifying as fundamental. I mean, the real enemy, if I want to label an enemy, is this irrationality that comes from something like fundamentalism really of any kind, Christian fundamentalism, Islamic fundamentalism, etc. And that seems to be dying down. I think that reason in general is having its day. And so, the label thing, I mean, I have had times when I have identified as atheist, and there have been other times when I say, you know what, forget about the labels. It's not about the labels. So, the labels don't matter that much to me. It's more about promoting reason and rationality and just believing things for good reasons. And I think in general, people are caring more about that because they have better access to information and more access to more informed people. So that's these are all good things. So it's a great topic, and thanks for having me on. So have a good night.
All right, cool. B.
Yeah, I agree with basically what everyone is saying. That, and kind of add a little bit to what Benny was saying, that I think that to me it's not really a matter of, I think that there's going to be religious belief in some form around as long as we have humans, and I don't know that that's something that we could get rid of and say we're going to be a secular society overall, but I think that what I have a problem with for the most part is the extremist or the dogmatic on any side, and those are the type of people that I would rather engage with or change minds if there were minds to be changed. That would be the one that I would focus on. People that are moderate, that are that can have their beliefs and hold them and not force them on other people. I really that's kind of their decision, their business, to me at least. So I would rather just focus on the people that are so set in the extreme views that that cause problems for everybody else. So yeah, thanks for letting me come on.
All right. Well, again, thanks for everybody that tuned into this. If you like, subscribe. If you have any suggestions for upcoming topics or would like to participate, feel free to send Deeper Than Dogma a message on Google Plus or in the comment section here. And hope you guys enjoyed it and have a good night.
Night, everyone.
Mm.